More than 650 children have been recruited into armed groups in South Sudan since the beginning, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, said today. The United Nations Children's Fund fears that renewed conflict could put tens of thousands of children at a greater risk of recruitment and has called for an immediate end to recruitment and unconditional release of all children by armed actors. The recruitments are going on despite a political commitment to end the practice. Sarah Kimani spoke to Justin Forsyth, the Deputy Director of UNICEF, who has just returned from a trip in the country.
From South Sudan, begin by telling us the towns that you visited and what you saw there.
I went to the capital, Juba, but then I also went on a UN helicopter out to a more remote area, Bentu town, which is up in the north. You can only get there by helicopter at the moment because of the rains. And I visited a hospital on landing, only a couple of beds in the hospital. Thousands of children in that area are malnourished. Mothers have complications in birth, and there's very few medical facilities supporting them. I also went to a camp of internally displaced people, over 100,000, that was they were being protected by Mongolian soldiers from the UN mission. And many of the people in that camp many of the children were malnourished. There were basic health facilities. There was high levels of malaria.
Is it because there is no access to humanitarian assistance that you saw a lot of malnourished children? Or is it because there had been a warning earlier that there may be problems with food in the country?
It's a mixture of factors. The latest outbreak of violence has complicated the humanitarian situation. There's been less humanitarian missions to these more remote places around the country, but it's also been poor crops earlier in the year. And also on top of that, there hasn't been enough resources provided to provide the type of nutritious and humanitarian aid we need to address these very high levels of severe acute malnutrition. In one state, which I didn't visit, Bahr Ghazal, World Food Programme and UNICEF are warning that we're close to famine if we don't act quickly.
You spoke about children now being recruited again into armed groups. What numbers are you talking about, and who is recruiting the children?
Well, we had about 16,000 children that had been recruited into the military in the last few years, but we know, and we were beginning to demobilise some of those children, reintegrate them into their families, into their communities, help provide counselling to them. I think around 1,700 children last year were supported in this way. But what we've seen with the outbreak of violence again is a surge in all sides, the government and the opposition now taking young people, mainly boys, into the military. There's a mobilisation going all across the country to try and get these boys into the military groups.
What risks do they stand? Most of them, we understand, are below the age of 12.
Well, 12, 13, 14, 15. Boys of all ages. They're forced to fight and kill, even rape, to commit atrocities. These children are very traumatized. Some of them are only there to carry the bags and make food, but a lot of them are forced to fight too. It ruins their childhood. One young boy who was 14, whose family I met, had been recruited into one of the armed groups for 3 years, and he's just started back at school. He's very excited, but you can tell the trauma that he's been through. He finds it hard to concentrate. He's very keen to study, but he'd never been to school for 14 years, and this was his first few weeks at school. So there is an opportunity to turn the lives of these children around, but we need to make sure that none of the armed groups are recruiting young people right now.
Wednesday was 1 year since South Sudan signed the peace agreement. What would you tell the international community, and what would you tell both sides to the conflict?
Well, we need both sides to the conflict to come together to find a solution. There's no real progress possible in South Sudan, and we won't make progress unless both sides come together and reach some kind of peaceful agreement. And we need the leaders to really step up to the mark. To the international community is that we can make a difference on the ground. I saw even in these remote areas like Bentu the difference that UNICEF can make in saving children's lives, even providing education in the middle of conflict. And we do need more resources urgently. We could double with $150 million our response on the ground right across South Sudan.
And finally, did you manage to speak to women? Because one of the issues that is going down in South Sudan is gender-based violence, sexual violence, sex being used as a weapon of war. Did you see that, and did you speak to the women?
Yes, and UNICEF has big programs right across the country, including in the very remote and rural areas on sexual violence against girls and women. And there's been a huge surge of that in recent weeks since this violence in July. I mean, a lot of women and girls were raped in Juba, but in the rural areas too, which is less reported. And we need all the different sides to take responsibility to stop that. And we need programs to help those women overcome that violence and to move forward.